3,000-ton stones stacked like toys. Cuts in rock so precise, they make our modern machines look like Stone Age tools. Temples intentionally buried 12,000 years ago. Entire cities under the ocean. Before the flood, before history began to be written, someone built monuments that defy all logic. We're not talking about hunter-gatherers with sticks. We're talking about a civilization that moved mountains, that cut stone like butter, that knew secrets we're barely beginning to rediscover. Today, you're going to completely change what you believe about the human past. Chapter 1. The Silent Nightmare of Baalbek. 3 stones. Just 3. Each weighs 700 tons. They were cut, moved, and placed with a precision that makes modern engineers scratch their heads and look the other way. This shouldn't be possible. And yet, there they are. In the Bekaa Valley, in Lebanon, stands Baalbek, a name that sounds like the first sigh of an ancient god after a cosmic laugh. What you see there isn't just impressive, it's offensive. Offensive to everything we think we know about the past, about human capabilities, about the chronology of civilization. You walk through the ruins of the Roman temple and everything seems normal. Columns, arches, spectacular reliefs. The Romans knew what they were doing. Nobody disputes that. But then you reach the trilithon and you realize that something here doesn't fit at all. There are 3 limestone blocks. 3. And each one is a 700-ton monster that measures 19 meters long, 4 meters high, and 3.6 meters wide. To give you an idea, that's like stacking 140 cars on top of each other and turning it into a single solid block. People try to explain their size by comparing them to jets, whales, train cars. But the comparisons don't work. These aren't like anything you've seen. They're immovable objects that defy all logical explanation. And here comes the part that's going to fry your brain. These stones didn't appear out of nowhere. Someone extracted them from a quarry. But the quarry isn't next to the temple, it's uphill, 1.5 kilometers away. And when I say uphill, it's literal. They had to drag 700 tons uphill. In that same quarry, there's a 4th stone that never reached its destination. They call it the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, and it weighs more than 1,200 tons. It's lying there, as if someone had abandoned the work halfway through. As if something had suddenly interrupted the builders. This is where things get really crazy. The history books tell us that the Romans built Baalbek around 60 AD. Bronze tools, wooden ramps, lots of brute force, and tons of slaves. The official story sounds very convincing until you start doing the math. First problem, the weight. 700 tons isn't a hypothetical figure that someone made up on an ancient papyrus. It's real, measurable, verifiable. To move a stone of that magnitude even a few meters, today you'd need specialized hydraulic systems, advanced planning, and millions of dollars. And that's with 21st century technology. In antiquity, with wooden rollers and slave power, no. Simply number. The stress alone would split the wood, blow the ramps to bits, and crush bones. There's a reason why every major modern engineering company that studied Baalbek basically responds with, yeah, we don't know. Second problem, the precision. The trilithon blocks aren't simply placed next to each other. They're fitted together like the most impossible puzzle in the world. You can't slip a razor blade between them. There are no binding agents, no mortar, just friction, gravity, and perfection. This level of precision isn't just aesthetic, it's functional. The platform had to support one of the most grandiose Roman temples ever built. That means the foundations couldn't settle, flex, or crack over time. They had to be perfect from day one. And here, we reach the most maddening part. The placement. These stones aren't lying in a field like some abandoned megalithic project. They're 4 meters off the ground, forming the 6th row of a foundation wall. That means whoever built this didn't just move the stones. They lifted them. They stacked them. With what? Nobody knows. Anti-gravity cranes, choirs of angels, ropes made from unicorn hair. This is the point where skeptics come up and whisper, aliens. And honestly, it's funny until you start looking at the alternatives, because the conventional explanations aren't just weak, they're insulting. The standard academic version says something like, the Romans were brilliant engineers. They built aqueducts, roads, and amphitheaters. They had cranes powered by treadwheels, teams of oxen, and lots of time. With enough slaves and ingenuity, they could have dragged, lifted, and fitted the trilithon into place. Sure, and with enough monkeys, typewriters, and eternity, you get the complete works of Shakespeare. But let's take a breath. Let's assume for a moment, just to maintain sanity, that the Romans didn't place the trilithon, that they found it, that the platform was already there and they built their temple on top. It wouldn't be the first time. Ancient cultures built on ancient ruins constantly. The Incas did it, the Egyptians did it, even the people of Göbekli Tepe buried their own temple for reasons we still don't know. So what if Baalbek isn't a Roman temple site at all? What if it's a prehistoric launch platform, a ritual complex, a refugee outpost from before the last great flood? What if the builders of Baalbek weren't men with chisels and sandals, but survivors of a lost civilization? People whose names were lost, but whose fingerprints are still pressing against the stone. This is where the oldest trick in the archaeological manipulation manual appears: the chronological firewall. That invisible line that archaeologists draw, saying civilization started here, before this only hunter-gatherers with sticks. Göbekli Tepe already destroyed that firewall, but Baalbek laughs in its face. Because there's no official dating method for the trilithon. You can't carbon-14 stone. So archaeologists date the site by its visible and datable layers: Roman coins, Roman masonry, Roman inscriptions. And they say, see, it's Roman. But that's the problem. You don't date the basement by analyzing the wallpaper on the upper floor. You have to dig deeper, look for inconsistencies. And Baalbek is full of them. The Roman architecture, although exquisite, is clearly superimposed on something else. The styles don't match, the scale doesn't match, the ambition doesn't match. It's like finding a log cabin built on a sunken aircraft carrier. You can't pretend the foundations belong to the cabin. So let's follow that thread. Let's follow the why. Why would someone, ancient, prehistoric, alien, or whatever, move such massive stones? Some suggest it was for stability, that larger stones better resist earthquakes. Others propose ritual significance, that the act of moving the immovable was itself a kind of offering. And others whisper about lost technologies: acoustic levitation, geopolymer science, resonance-based transport. Ideas that sound absurd until you look at the trilithon again and realize that the absurd already happened. The stones are there. That's the miracle and curse of Baalbek. No matter how many times you look at them, study them, or simulate them, the facts remain the same. 3 impossibly enormous stones were extracted, moved, lifted, and placed with a precision we can't easily replicate today. Not with our technology, not with our theories, not without rewriting history. And while we stand in the shadow of this forgotten marvel, in a place where myth and mortar collide, where the ancients defied gravity itself and won, a question begins to form in the deepest part of your mind. If this is real, if this existed before everything we think we know about civilization, what else is hiding out there? But Baalbek is just the first whisper of a conversation that extends across the entire planet. What we'll find in the Andes will make these 700 tons look like child's play. and will reveal that whoever built this didn't just master stone. They mastered something much more fundamental. Chapter 2. Puma Punku, the Nightmare Factory. At 3,800 meters above sea level, where the air becomes so thin that breathing is like doing it through gauze, in the windy desolation of the Bolivian Altiplano, someone left a message. Not in ink, not in myth, but in stone. And that message says one thing: you know nothing. Puma Punku is the place where logic goes to die. It's a collection of megalithic blocks scattered like Lego pieces, forgotten since the dawn of time. They're not carved with hieroglyphs or crowned by gods. They don't pretend to tell you what they are. Instead, they challenge you to explain how they came to exist. What you see there doesn't feel ancient. It feels alien. Not because little green men came, but because what's sitting in that place simply shouldn't exist. The stones are andesite and red sandstone, some of the hardest and most fragile materials you could try to shape. Forget bronze chisels. You'd be lucky to scratch these surfaces with iron. And yet, there they are, cut and dressed like factory components. There are blocks with perfectly flat faces, right angles so sharp they could cut your pride, and details that look less like hand-carved and more like precision machining. These weren't roughly sketched by hands using stone tools. They were designed. And then there are those H-shaped blocks, the ones that appear in all the conspiracy documentaries. They're real. Dozens of them, identical in size, shape, and proportion, with recessed grooves, interlocking edges, and perfect symmetry. You could swap one for another and the fit would hold. They're not similar. They're duplicates. Mass production in stone. If you walk through Puma Punku with a set of calipers, and many have, you're going to find tolerances of less than a millimeter. Holes drilled cleanly through solid blocks with consistent diameter and depth. Side cuts so parallel, you can run a metal square along the edge and not hear a scrape. There are cuts that go several centimeters deep into the rock, maintaining straight-line precision all the way down, as if they had been sliced with a modern saw. Which raises the question, how? Let's entertain the mainstream explanation. The Tiwanaku civilization, sometime between 500 and 1000 AD, created this complex. Without a writing system, without known tools beyond bronze, without wheels in practical use, without pulleys, without cranes. Just human hands, stone tools, and an amazing amount of faith in muscle and time. But let's be clear. Bronze doesn't cut andesite. Bronze bounces off andesite. Bronze apologizes to andesite. So the backup explanation becomes this. They pecked away for weeks, for months, with harder rocks over and over, slowly and deliberately, creating geometries that look like CAD software output rendered in solid mass. It's like saying someone carved a Formula One engine block with a spoon. Let's talk about the size of the stones. Some of the largest blocks at Puma Punku weigh more than 130 tons. The sandstone slab used for foundations tipped the scale at 130 tons. These weren't extracted from the backyard. The andesite came from 90 kilometers away. The sandstone came from 10 kilometers across rough and irregular terrain, and they had to cross a river. That's a logistical nightmare, even with diesel engines. But up here, where altitude starts to mess with your blood oxygen, dragging those stones across country becomes more than implausible. It becomes delusional. Let's time travel. Imagine hundreds of workers, without pulleys, without beasts of burden, without wheels, just ropes, ramps, and willpower. Now imagine them navigating steep slopes, uneven terrain, and a frozen, wind-swept plateau, dragging house-sized stones with wood that splinters under half the load. you start to realize this isn't a construction project. It's a death march. Even if they had infinite time, the end result isn't what you'd expect from primitive trial and error. You don't stumble onto industrial precision. You don't accidentally make modular blocks with designed interfaces. You don't peck your way to CAD-style symmetry with a hammerstone and optimism. And then there's the layout. Puma's design isn't random. It's not just a pile of elegant blocks. The complex once had platforms, gates, steps, assembled like a modular system. Many of the blocks were interlocking, not simply stacked. That means whoever designed this didn't just think vertically. They thought structurally, architecturally. Each block was part of a larger whole, and that whole was planned with terrifying foresight. But today, they're ruins, scattered, broken. The site looks like it was hit by a cosmic hammer. The stones lie overturned, fragmented, some flipped upside down, others thrown meters from their original positions. This doesn't look like collapse from time or erosion. It looks like violent destruction. A precision structure torn apart by an explosion, an earthquake, or something worse. One theory: cataclysm, sudden, overwhelming. Something that ended the culture or civilization that built Puma Punku. A global flood, a comet, a pole shift. It sounds dramatic until you realize the damage matches the story. This wasn't slow deterioration. This was obliteration. The Tiwanaku people may have inherited the site, expanded, worshipped there, but did they build the original complex? There's a silent debate buried under the academic surface. Whispers about a pre-Tiwanaku origin. That maybe, just maybe, they found Puma Punku like the Romans may have found Baalbek. Because here's the dirty secret. Puma Punku hasn't been conclusively dated. You can carbon date nearby organic material, charcoal, wood, bones, but you can't carbon date stone. So when archaeologists say Puma Punku is 1,500 years old, what they're really saying is that the things we found near Puma Punku are 1,500 years old. But the stones, they could be much older. Some geologists and alternative researchers suggest dates that push Puma Punku back to the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago. A period that aligns disturbingly well with myths of great floods, destroyed civilizations, and sudden events that changed the world. Plato's Atlantis, the Sumerian flood, the biblical flood, stories that echo from culture to culture, stories that start to sound less like metaphor and more like memory. And if Puma Punku is a memory carved in stone, then it's not just an outlier, it's evidence. Evidence that something existed before our version of history began, something capable of engineering feats we still struggle to explain. So what happened to them? Maybe they were wiped out, maybe they left, maybe they became us, but we forgot who we were. Puma Punku doesn't answer those questions. It just leaves them hanging in the high-altitude air, echoing through fractured stone. This site isn't alone. All over the world there are structures like this, structures that laugh at chronology, that spit in the face of progress narratives, that whisper, "You don't know what you think you know." But Puma Punku is unique in a chilling way. It looks like a crime scene, like a technological civilization that was stopped mid-sentence, like the site was frozen in the act of construction, deconstruction, and then blown to pieces. And when you think you've seen the full extent of impossibility, when you think the limits of ancient precision and scale have been reached, the Andean highlands deal you one more card. Not just big, not just fitted, but monstrous, convex, concave, and woven like a giant stone serpent. Chapter 3. Sacsayhuaman, the living stone serpent. It's a fortress, it's a wall, it's a serpent made of stone zigzagging across a hillside. In the Peruvian city of Cusco, the ancient capital of the Inca Empire, stands one of the most visually striking megalithic structures on Earth. The locals say it's the head of a great sky serpent. It certainly looks like it. Zigzagging layers of massive stones, some weighing up to 200 tons, form the walls of Sacsayhuaman. No matter how many documentaries you've seen or books you've read, standing in front of this makes your brain hurt. Because it simply shouldn't exist. We're not talking about a wall made of cut stone blocks. We're talking about a structure made of non-linear, irregular, multi-angular, and interconnected megaliths. Each stone has a unique shape, fitting into its neighbors with such tension you'd think the whole thing was molded like clay. But these aren't bricks. They're rocks, some as tall as 3 men, others heavier than diesel locomotives, all fused without mortar, without concrete, without a single visible joint. Conventional construction follows logic, engineering, physics. You have tools, you have a plan, you have slaves or workers, and step by step, you build something. But at Sacsayhuaman, the scale crosses the line between technological achievement and mythological insanity. To move a 100-ton stone, you need power. Not theoretical power, brute power. The kind that doesn't just break tools, but breaks civilizations if you get it wrong. The stones at Sacsayhuaman were quarried miles away from the site. They were dragged, floated, rolled or something across valleys, up slopes, and finally fitted into place on a hillside that was never meant to contain them. And they don't just sit there. They fit. They connect like some prehistoric version of Lego, designed by a mind that had long abandoned the idea of easy geometry. Many of the stones have up to a dozen faces, each cut precisely to match the faces of surrounding blocks. There's no repetitive pattern, no convenience of square upon square. Each joint is unique. This isn't construction. This is sculpture on the scale of tectonic plates. Conventional archaeology tells us the Incas built Sacsayhuaman in the 15th century. But there's a catch. The Incas themselves never claimed to have built the whole thing. They said it was already there, a gift from the gods, a relic from before. They built on top, repaired sections, used it. But the oldest parts, the largest stones, the tightest joints, the most insane feats of masonry, even they attributed to the first ones, a forgotten people with a forgotten name. The precision of the joints defies reason. You can't slip a sheet of paper between them. Not because they were pressed together like bricks, but because they were carved to interconnect at strange angles. That means the builders didn't just shape each stone individually. They shaped them in relation to the stones already in place. Imagine trying to carve a puzzle piece to fit into 5 or 6 other puzzle pieces. Each one weighs more than a space shuttle, and once you slide it into place, that's it. No do-overs, no adjustments, no oops. You get one carving, one placement, perfect or nothing. Let's be clear, there's no historical record of tools that could achieve this. No chisel, no forge, no blueprint. No how-to guide for making 200-ton stones kiss their neighbors with sub-millimeter intimacy. And no modern construction company, even with laser scanning and heavy-duty cranes, has attempted to replicate Sacsayhuaman. Why? Because it's not just difficult, it's insanity. Look closer. Many of the stones are both convex and concave. They curve outward on one face, inward on another. Some join not in flat seams, but in curved, undulating lines. This isn't just decorative, it's structural. Earthquake-resistant, flexible under pressure. The kind of design you get from centuries of seismic engineering. More disturbingly, from inherited knowledge of a civilization that had already seen everything collapse. And collapse it did. The upper layers of Sacsayhuaman, finer and smaller stonework, are Incan. Nobody disputes that. But the deeper you go, the larger and stranger the stones become. More advanced, more inexplicable. It's an inversion of expected history. The further back you go, the better the craftsmanship becomes. That's not the way civilization is supposed to work. We're told history is a steady slope from ignorance to enlightenment, from stone to steel, from caves to cathedrals. But Sacsayhuaman punches a hole in that narrative. Because what we see here isn't primitive. It's post-something. A ruin of genius, not its beginning. Let's talk technique. There are three main theories for how this masonry was achieved. First, the orthodox view, shaping stones with hammerstones and hours of painstaking abrasion. Possible, yes, but not at this scale, not with this precision, and certainly not in a timeline that matches the known history of the Incas. Second, the lost technology theory, that the builders had access to tools, metal perhaps, or even sound or heat, that allowed them to soften stone or manipulate it like clay. There's no hard evidence of this technology, only the stones themselves. But the stones are evidence enough. Third, and strangest of all, the liquid stone hypothesis, that some of the blocks were molded into place using a geopolymer compound. Essentially, ancient concrete. This would explain the perfect joints, the complex faces, the molded appearance. But the stones at Sacsayhuaman aren't synthetic. They're natural limestone and andesite. So unless they were melting and reshaping natural stone, this theory hits a wall. Literally. And yet, despite all this, Sacsayhuaman endures. It survived countless earthquakes, conquests, weather, and war. The Spanish conquistadors tried to dismantle it. They managed to loot the smaller stones, but the big ones, they couldn't move, couldn't budge. So the greatest demolition force of the early modern world gave up and built their churches with whatever scraps they could carry. The rest they left in place, monuments to an earlier, stranger world. Walk the zigzagging walls of Sacsayhuaman and you'll feel it. That sensation of something that doesn't belong, not in time, not in the usual boxes of history. It's too refined to be primitive, too strong to be decorative, too massive to be ritual. It was built to last not centuries, but eras. Through flood, fire, and earthquake. And for what? That's the question that twists in your stomach. Why would someone move such massive stones, shape them so perfectly, and fit them so intricately unless it served a purpose? Beyond the obvious? Protection against what? An invading army? Earthquakes? Or something else? It's easy to fall down the rabbit hole. The serpent-shaped layout, the three-tiered levels, the astronomical alignment, it all smells of encoded knowledge. Something bigger than a fortress. Maybe even older than the Incas themselves were willing to admit. And here's the final kicker. This isn't the only site like this. Across Peru, across the Andes, across the world, you find the same fingerprint. Giant stones of strange shape and interconnected preposterous weights, impossible angles, no mortar, no margin for error. It's as if an ancient guild of megalithic engineers once wandered the planet building the same way, with the same impossible standards, and then vanished. What were they building? Nobody knows. But it wasn't just shelter. It was something meant to endure, to be found, to be remembered. And maybe that's why it's still standing, not just as a wall, but as a warning. That beneath our neatly packaged timelines, beneath textbook certainty, there's a deeper story. One of flood and fire, of giants and gods, of tools and techniques forgotten by time. And if Sacsayhuaman is the head of the serpent, then the body extends further, up, down, and into the very bones of the earth. Chapter 4. Machu Picchu. The secret in the clouds. High above the Urubamba River Valley, wrapped in clouds like a mirage frozen mid-dream, sits one of the world's most iconic sites. Machu Picchu, every traveler's bucket list, every textbook's mandatory photo. But strip away the tourism, remove the selfie sticks and panpipe soundtrack, and what you're left with is something stranger, something older, something that shouldn't be there at all. They call it the Lost City of the Incas, but even that name is a kind of lie. Because Machu Picchu was never truly lost, and it might not be purely Inca. The official story goes like this. In the mid-15th century, Pachacutec, the Inca emperor with a divine ego and a talent for monumental real estate, ordered the construction of a royal estate. Something glorious, something unreachable, a literal city in the clouds. So the Incas got to work. They carved terraces into steep slopes, built temples aligned to the solstice sun, constructed observatories, shrines, aqueducts. They dragged granite from quarries hundreds of meters away and fused it without mortar. They did what the Incas always did: turn the impossible into infrastructure, except not all of it. Because the deeper you walk into Machu Picchu, the older it gets. Not chronologically, but architecturally. The highest and most photogenic temples, the Temple of the Sun, the Room of the Three Windows, the Intihuatana stone, bear the classic Inca fingerprint. Polished stonework, mortarless joints, precise alignments with celestial events. But look closer, and you'll find something much older beneath the terraces, behind the walls, embedded in the bedrock itself. Megalithic blocks, some so large and perfectly integrated into the mountainside that they don't even look like separate stones. They look as if Machu Picchu had been grown, not built, as if the mountain itself rose up and decided to become a city. And then there's the difference in masonry. The upper layers are textbook Inca: squared stones, polygonal fits, dry stone walls that lean slightly inward to resist earthquakes. Sophisticated, yes, but humanly understandable, replicable. The lower layers laugh at replication. Massive cyclopean blocks carved into impossible shapes, each one unique, each one interlocking with its neighbors in ways that seem more biological than architectural. No straight lines, no modular repetition, just fluid, organic stone like the mountain was molded by a sentient tide. It's the same unsettling signature we've seen before. At Sacsayhuaman, at Ollantaytambo, at Tiwanaku. A style that doesn't scale with time, but with mystery. The older it looks, the more precise it becomes. Now let's talk about the terrain. Machu Picchu isn't just high up, it's inaccessible. It clings to the saddle between two peaks, surrounded on three sides by steep drops. It's a logistical nightmare. Building anything here requires effort. Building a city is architectural masochism. The site had to be flattened, drained, terraced, stabilized, and somehow its designers managed it with surgical precision. The entire city is built with its own integrated drainage system. Channels carved into rock, canals disguised as steps, and an understanding of rainwater runoff that rivals modern engineering. Let that sink in. A civilization without wheels, without iron tools, without written language, at least none that survived, designed a hydrological system that still works half a millennium later. But again, the deeper mystery isn't what the Incas built, it's what they built on. There are rumors, persistent ones, about tunnels under Machu Picchu, hidden chambers, megalithic foundations that disappear into the mountainside like veins of forgotten ambition. Some of the older stonework appears melted, as if it had been subjected to extreme heat or softened like clay. That's not a theory, that's a visual observation. You can go there yourself and see where the rock seems to drip, as if something beyond chisels and elbow grease had been at work. Mainstream academics dismiss these anomalies as erosion. But erosion doesn't explain intentional molding. It doesn't explain the perfect fit between stones that curve to meet like lovers frozen in an embrace. It doesn't explain the almost alien difference in architectural style between upper and lower levels. It doesn't explain why the deeper you go, the more advanced the construction becomes. Unless, of course, you're looking at inheritance. What if Machu Picchu isn't a sacred Inca achievement, but a palimpsest? Layers of civilization stacked on top of each other, each one claiming the bones of the previous? What if the Incas, like the Romans, were merely the last occupants of a site with a prehistoric past? Look at the layout. Machu Picchu is more than a city. It's a machine. Its structures align with astronomical events: the June solstice sunrise, the December solstice sunset. The Intihuatana stone, often called the hitching post of the sun, casts no shadow during the equinox. That's not an accident. That's celestial engineering. And it suggests not just knowledge of astronomy, but intimate knowledge, the kind that comes from generations of observation, of mapping the skies, not just to keep calendar, but to survive. So who were the original architects? There are theories. Some say it was an earlier branch of the Incas, long forgotten by the empire's later scribes. Others suggest an entirely lost civilization, an Andean equivalent of Atlantis, erased by catastrophe, leaving only stone to whisper its legacy. And then there are the more esoteric suggestions, that the site was chosen not just for defense or beauty, but for its energetic properties. That Machu Picchu sits on a ley line, part of a global network of ancient power centers. That the city in the clouds was not merely a royal retreat, but a spiritual antenna, an interface between heaven and earth. Believe that or not, one thing is clear. Machu Picchu wasn't just built, it was placed. It fits the mountain like a second skin. Every terrace, every wall, every step aligns with the landscape. There's no forcing of geometry onto nature. There's a fusion, a symbiosis that isn't conquest. That's communion. And maybe that's the secret. Maybe the reason Machu Picchu endures, the reason it feels so otherworldly, is because it wasn't just an architectural project, but a philosophy, a worldview carved in granite. One that saw mountains not as obstacles, but as partners. One that didn't separate the sacred from the scientific. Of course, the Spanish never found Machu Picchu. They burned Cusco, dismantled the temples, but this mountaintop miracle remained untouched, wrapped in mist, hidden by jungle, as if it wanted to be forgotten. And maybe it did. Because once you see it, really see it, you can't unsee the contradictions. You can't pretend that the official story, the one printed on tourist brochures and taught in textbooks, accounts for all of it. It doesn't. The oldest parts of Machu Picchu belong to a world that doesn't make sense. A world where stones bend, where cities breathe with the mountain, where builders knew more than they should have known. And just when you think this is where the impossible ends, just when you think this is as deep as the rabbit hole goes, the trail twists again. From Machu Picchu, the path winds to a place less famous, but even more bewildering. A place where stones don't just fit, they float. Where mountains are steep, walls are colossal, and construction turns the laws of physics into a suggestion. Chapter 5. The Pyramids of Giza, the Stone Time Machine. The Giza Plateau stands like a defiant memory. 3 pyramids rise tall against time, erosion, and every attempt to explain them. Among them, a supreme queen, the Great Pyramid of Giza, a monument so colossal, so meticulously built, that it should not just dominate the Egyptian desert horizon, it should dominate our sense of what is historically possible. We've been told the official story, that around 2560 BC, Pharaoh Khufu commissioned the Great Pyramid as his tomb. That 20 years later, 2.3 million limestone blocks, each weighing up to 2.5 tons, had been precisely quarried, transported, raised, and fitted into place with mathematical perfection. All this using copper tools, wooden sleds, and only human force. The story sounds noble, romantic, full of dusty glory and whip-cracking logistics. But let's not lie to ourselves. The numbers don't add up. To complete the pyramid in 20 years, workers would have had to place one block every 2.5 minutes, day and night, without fail, for 2 straight decades. That means quarrying, moving, shaping, aligning, and placing blocks at maddening speed, without cranes, without power tools, without GPS. And yet, here's the thing. The Great Pyramid isn't a pile of rocks. It's an architectural code locked in stone. Each side of the base measures 230.4 meters long, and those sides are aligned to true north, south, east, and west, with a margin of error of less than 1/15 of a degree. That's not impressive for the ancient world. That's impressive for today. Aligning a 6 million-ton monument to cardinal points with such accuracy would be a feat of surveying genius, even with lasers and satellites. Then, there's the footprint. The pyramid is built on a bedrock platform so level it deviates less than an inch across its entire 13-acre base. That level of precision suggests a method of measurement and construction more refined than anything attributed to the Old Kingdom. Inside it gets weirder. The Great Pyramid isn't hollow, but it's not solid either. It contains chambers, some known, some recently discovered, connected by narrow passages aligned with astronomical bodies. The King's Chamber is lined with massive granite slabs, each weighing between 30 and 60 tons, transported from Aswan, more than 500 miles to the south. These slabs weren't just placed. They were fitted so tightly you can't slip a sheet of paper between them. And the internal angles, they remain confoundingly perfect. The Grand Gallery rises at 26 degrees with corbelled walls supporting a ceiling high enough to swallow most buildings. The passages and shafts align with stars like the Belt of Orion and Sirius, leading some to speculate that the entire structure is less a tomb and more a cosmic harmonizer, a clock, a machine. But if it's a tomb, it's a strange one. Because there's no decoration, no hieroglyphs, no treasure, no mummy, no inscriptions proclaiming Khufu's glory. Just raw, resonant stone. Unlike every other known royal tomb in Egypt, which is crammed with painted scenes, elaborate spells, and divine announcements for the afterlife, the Great Pyramid is silent. Silent and purposeful. Even the dimensions hint at something deeper. The pyramid's height, when multiplied by a certain factor, gives you Earth's polar radius. The base, when measured correctly, encodes pi. Whether by coincidence or design, the height to base proportions mirror the geometry of a sphere circumscribed by a pyramid. That kind of mathematical elegance doesn't come from guesswork. Consider the casing stones. Originally, the Great Pyramid was covered in gleaming Tura limestone, polished to a mirror finish. These casing stones fitted so precisely that even a razor blade couldn't slide between them. They reflected the sun so brilliantly that the pyramid could be seen shining from miles away. Some ancient historians described it as blazing like a jewel. Most of the casing stones were looted in the Middle Ages, stripped away and used to build mosques and buildings in Cairo. But a few remain. And their craftsmanship suggests something more than just artistry. It suggests a level of refinement, typically reserved for precision industrial manufacturing. Now imagine placing those casing stones some weighing more than 15 tons, at the very top of a 480-foot-high structure. Without cranes, without scaffolding, in an era where the wheel itself was still relatively new. It's not impossible, but it's implausible. So who built it if it wasn't Khufu and his copper chisels? One theory points to a much older civilization than dynastic Egyptian people, whose knowledge of astronomy, geometry, and stone engineering eclipsed anything we currently associate with 4th Dynasty Egypt. A culture whose architectural fingerprints appear not just at Giza, but across the globe. The whispers of a forgotten age sound far-fetched until you remember the Sphinx for a moment, the guardian of the plateau. Geologists have argued for decades about the weathering on its body. The deep vertical fissures carved into its enclosure suggest water erosion, massive rainfall, more consistent with a wetter, pre-desert Sahara. If that analysis holds, it would date the Sphinx and potentially the structures around it to a time much earlier than 2500 BC. And if the Sphinx is older, then the pyramid must be reconsidered. Because here's the catch. There's no concrete contemporary documentation of the pyramid's construction. No scrolls, no murals, no quarry records that definitively say this is how we built the Great Pyramid. What we have are later inscriptions, stories written centuries after the fact. And in archaeology, that kind of temporal gap should raise red flags, not reinforce confidence. Then there's the question of why. If the pyramid isn't a tomb, and nothing in it suggests it is, then what is it? Some believe it was a power plant, that the pyramid harnessed subtle energy fields from the earth, amplified them through the crystal-like properties of granite and limestone, and radiated them through its internal shafts. Others think it was a repository of knowledge, a stone hard drive that encoded geometry, astronomy, and cosmology in its dimensions. It's easy to dismiss these ideas as fringe until you realize that mainstream explanations require an equal amount of blind faith in unproven logistics. Building the Great Pyramid today remains a titanic enterprise. We'd need to manufacture custom cranes, develop heavy lifting systems, and spend billions on materials and labor. And even then, we'd probably be off by a few millimeters here and there. We couldn't match the sheer consistency of precision found in this supposed ancient relic. So what does that tell us? It tells us that the Great Pyramid isn't just an outlier. It's a boundary marker, a line in the sand between the history we're taught and the history that might have been. It stands in defiance of timelines, material science, and our collective sense of superiority. It whispers the same thing Baalbek did, the same thing Puma Punku screamed, the same thing Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo suggested you forgot something, and that something isn't a footnote, it's a lost chapter, an erased prologue to human civilization. The Great Pyramid isn't just a monument, it's a monument to memory itself, a cosmic marker that says, start here. And just when you think the madness reaches its peak, when you think Giza's scale and silence cannot be surpassed, you dive beneath the sands into darkness, into a labyrinth where 100-ton sarcophagi rest in perfect tunnels, polished to mirror finishes, sealed in stone chambers that defy all explanation. Chapter 6. The Serapeum, the Crypt of Giants. Deep beneath the sands of Saqqara, down a sloping corridor carved through limestone, in silence lies a place that shouldn't exist. It's dark, it's cold, it smells of dust, stone, and forgotten answers. It's called the Serapeum, and it is, without exaggeration, one of the most chilling enigmas of the ancient world. Imagine an underground labyrinth extending more than 300 meters through solid bedrock, lined with side chambers, each housing a monolithic stone box. These aren't sarcophagi in the usual sense. These are coffins for gods, for beasts, for mysteries. There are 24 of these boxes, each carved from a single block of granite or basalt, each weighing between 70 and 100 tons, with lids weighing another 30. Let's be clear, these aren't decorative accessories or ceremonial props. These are engineered. The precision of the boxes is mind-bending. Internal corners that meet at perfect right angles, interiors polished like mirrors, and tolerances so tight you could barely slide a human hair between the box and its lid. Some boxes are so perfectly square, so smooth, so impossibly exact that engineers who have studied them report tolerances within 0.002 of an inch. That's not craftsmanship, that's industrial precision. And yet, we're told these were made 3,300 years ago, in the time of the New Kingdom, carved using diorite balls and copper chisels, lifted into place with brute force, ramps, and prayer. Let's pause for a moment. You're underground, in a corridor barely wide enough to maneuver a minivan, much less a 100-ton stone block. The ceiling is low, the angles are awkward, the ramps non-existent. And yet, these boxes weren't just moved inside. They were placed gently, perfectly, within niches barely large enough to contain them. No signs of forced entry, no impact damage, no broken edges, as if each box had been levitated into position and deposited with a sigh. To accept that this was done with rudimentary tools is to accept that somewhere, in a lost manual of ancient logistics, there exists a chapter titled How to Perform Underground Precision Mechatronics Without Electricity or Space. Because the Serapeum isn't just odd, it's mockingly impossible. Let's step back to what the boxes are supposed to contain. According to mainstream Egyptology, the Serapeum was a burial site for the Apis bull, sacred animals worshipped as earthly incarnations of the god Ptah, later associated with Osiris and Serapis. The idea is that each box housed the mummified remains of a bull, which were ritually buried and sealed forever. But here's the thing. Most of the boxes were found empty. Some had bones, a few weak traces of organic material, but nothing of clearly preserved bull remains. Nothing you'd expect if the site had been used consistently for centuries to house deified cattle. Then there's the question of scale. If the goal was to honor a bull, why build a studio apartment-sized sarcophagus? Why move heaven and earth to place a perfectly machined 100-ton granite box in an underground vault just to fill it with an animal? It doesn't add up, unless we're asking the wrong question. Maybe the boxes weren't just for bulls. Maybe the bulls were symbolic, part of a ritual or cult practice that had forgotten the original purpose of these objects. Maybe the Serapeum is an inheritance from a much older civilization, whose technology we no longer recognize as such because we can't replicate it. Let's talk about the granite for a moment. The granite used for the Serapeum boxes came from Aswan, almost 600 miles to the south. That means these 100-ton monoliths weren't just carved. They were moved across the Nile Valley, loaded, floated, dragged, then brought down into an underground tunnel system and installed with millimeter precision. There's no known pulley system from this era that could handle that load. There's no workforce strong enough to shift that mass in such confined space without destroying the very chamber they're trying to fill. And if you think that's the end of it, think again. Some of the boxes show signs of strange tools. Linear striations, scoop marks, even rotational cuts, suggesting tools that moved in circular motion. Not hand chiseling, not pecking, but something more like lathes or high-speed cutting tools. Mainstream academics explain this as polishing techniques or abrasion over time. But polishing doesn't produce grooves. Abrasion doesn't create spiral furrows. So what does? And why does nobody seem to want to find out? There's a cognitive dissonance at play when you walk through the Serapeum. The tunnel walls are rough, crude, unadorned. The lighting is modern, artificial. You see dust, pipes, cables. But then you turn a corner, and there it is. A perfect box, alien in its perfection. So geometrically smooth and flawless, you could use it as a calibration object for industrial machines. And it just sits there, waiting. It feels like something out of science fiction, like a black box recorder from a previous civilization, a safe, a vault, not for bulls, for data, for secrets. Some researchers speculate that the boxes were designed to resonate, that they could hum at specific frequencies, maybe even vibrate when struck. There are stories, mostly anecdotal, of strange acoustic effects within the chambers. Standing waves, echoes that never die. The boxes might have been part of a sound-based technology, a system that used vibration or frequency to store or transmit information. Far-fetched, maybe, but no more far-fetched than believing that a team of Bronze Age workers descended into a rocky cave basement carrying a 100-ton granite cube with nothing more than ropes, wooden sleds, and optimism. And remember, the Serapeum wasn't even discovered until 1850 by French archaeologist Auguste Mariette, who stumbled upon it while chasing ancient texts. When he cleared the sand and entered the tomb, he must have thought he'd found the remains of gods. What he really found was something worse, a room full of questions. Because there's no inscription that says, "This is how we did it." There are no murals showing ramps, levers, or workers sweating under the sun. Just granite, darkness, silence. Even stranger, some of the boxes appear to have been damaged by force, not by time, not by erosion, but by attempts to break in. As if later cultures tried to open what they didn't understand and failed. That tells us something. That even centuries or millennia later, these boxes remained sealed, intact, impenetrable. Whoever built them didn't just want to bury something. They wanted it never to be found, never disturbed. They wanted the boxes to survive cataclysm, flood, fire, time. And they have. The Serapeum, like the Great Pyramid, like Baalbek, like Pumapunku, exists in defiance of time. A middle finger carved in stone, pointed directly at the arrogance of our modern certainty. We want history to be linear, to make sense. We want it to be the story of steady progress. But the Serapeum whispers otherwise. It suggests peaks before valleys, genius before dust. And it's not the only whisper. Further north, older still, buried beneath layers of sediment and forgotten myth, stands a temple. Not made of bricks, but of pillars, circles of stone that predate writing, agriculture, cities. A place where hunter-gatherers carved dreams into stone and arranged them in cosmic order. A place that changes everything. Chapter 7. Göbekli Tepe, the Temple of Apocalypse. There are places in the world that feel older than time. Göbekli Tepe is one of them. But not because it's simply ancient. Many ruins are ancient. Göbekli Tepe is different because it doesn't feel like the beginning of something. It feels like the end. Not a beginning, a memory, a silent, meticulous, and chilling elegy carved in stone, buried on purpose, forgotten by design. We're in southeastern Turkey, around 10,000 BC. That's 12,000 years ago. 7,000 years before the pyramids, before writing, before wheels, before organized religion. But not, apparently, before monument building. Because someone or something left a message here. Not in ink, not in myth, but in architecture. And that message says one thing and only one thing. You weren't the first. The chronology is what fries your brain first. Around 10,000 BC, humans were supposed to be nomadic hunter-gatherers. They lived in scattered bands, ate roots, chased deer. No cities, no temples, no complex society. And yet, here's Göbekli Tepe, a temple, a monument, a question carved in limestone. Massive T-shaped pillars, some over 20 feet tall, arranged in concentric circles. Dozens of them, each weighing up to 20 tons, carved, raised, and set upright with intention. Some of the pillars are anthropomorphic. Broad shoulders, arms folded across the chest. Others are blank, but many are engraved with animals. Foxes, snakes, scorpions, boars, birds, predators, and prey. The carvings aren't random. They're symbolic, stylized, organized, and they're deep reliefs, meaning someone didn't just scratch images into stone, they sculpted them carefully, with tools, with vision. And that's the problem. Because according to everything we thought we knew, this site shouldn't exist. Not this early, not with this complexity, not with this precision. At the time Göbekli Tepe was built, humans were supposed to still be nomadic hunter-gatherers. But the labor investment here, carving, quarrying, raising, aligning, suggests hundreds, maybe thousands of organized workers. That implies social hierarchy, shared belief, leadership, planning. In other words, civilization. Only civilization wasn't supposed to have happened yet. Göbekli Tepe flips the script. It suggests that complex religious structures didn't result from agriculture, they preceded it. That people came together first to worship, to build monuments to the sky, and only later figured out how to farm to sustain their gatherings. In this version of history, it wasn't the plow that gave birth to civilization. It was the altar. But Göbekli Tepe isn't just a wrinkle in time, it's a fracture. Let's talk about the construction. The pillars were quarried from nearby limestone bedrock. Fine. But shaping them, raising them, and positioning them without metal tools, without beasts of burden, without pulleys, is such an astonishing feat that it forces even mainstream archaeologists to hedge their certainty. Imagine carving a 20-ton pillar, moving it across uneven terrain, and setting it upright with only ropes and ingenuity. Now imagine doing it over and over, for centuries, for different enclosures layered one on top of the next. Some enclosures are 20 feet deep, meaning earlier levels were intentionally backfilled, buried. That's right, Göbekli Tepe was buried on purpose. Meticulously, not by accident, not by collapse, but by design. Layer upon layer of fill, hiding the structure from the world for 10,000 years. Why? That question hangs in the dust like the breath of ghosts. Was it sacred, dangerous, meant to be preserved for the future, or hidden from it? Nobody knows. And then there's the symbolism. The carvings at Göbekli Tepe aren't just pretty pictures. They form a language. Not a written language per se, but a symbolic one. Patterns repeat. Some animals dominate like the fox, others, like snakes, appear around certain configurations. Some researchers think the carvings may represent constellations, astronomical events, mythical cycles. Others go further. They point to the so-called vulture stone, Pillar 43. It shows a headless human figure, a scorpion and birds carrying spheres. For some, it's a representation of death, a journey of the soul. For others, it's a cosmic story, an account of the Younger Dryas impact event, a comet, a catastrophe that ended the world. That's right. Some believe Göbekli Tepe is a memorial, not to gods, but to an event that ended the world, a civilization that ended in floods, the one that echoed in Sumer, in Egypt, in Genesis, the one that tore apart an earlier advanced culture and left only stones to remember it. And this is where things get weird. Because Göbekli Tepe didn't appear out of nowhere. It shows signs of mastery, of planning, of tradition. It looks like the continuation of something, not the beginning. the carving skills, the symbolic language, the architectural design. These aren't baby steps. These are the steps of craftsmen already confident in their craft. And that means the knowledge had to come from somewhere. Göbekli Tepe, in that view, isn't the alpha. It's the omega, the last breath of something older, something lost. But who were they? The builders remain nameless. No bodies have been found at the site, no houses, no settlements. Just tools, animal bones, and those monolithic circles of stone. We don't know what they called themselves, what gods they worshipped, what stories they told. But we know this: they remembered. They remembered something so powerful that they carved it into rock and buried it for safekeeping. A story told not in words, but in alignments, in animals, in architecture. A message across millennia. And maybe that's why it was buried. Maybe they saw something coming. A flood, a change, a forgetting. Maybe they saw the end and decided to preserve a fragment of the beginning. Even the design of Göbekli Tepe feels intentional. The enclosures are arranged in patterns, some circular, some with twin central pillars facing each other like sentinels. Male and female, sky and earth, life and death. It feels like a ritual theater, a place not just of worship, but of transmission, of knowledge passed through symbols, through shadow and light. And this site, this frozen ritual theater, wasn't alone. Scattered across the region are other hills, other mounds, Karahan Tepe, Navali Chori, more tepes still buried beneath the ground, waiting. The entire region may be a vast necropolis of memory, a network of prehistoric Vaticans, a shattered library of stone. And if Göbekli Tepe is the tip of the spear, what lies beneath the rest? The narrative we've inherited, that civilization began in Sumer, flourished in Egypt, bloomed in Greece, is starting to bend. Göbekli Tepe is older than all of them. Older than cities, older than writing, older than the idea of time. And yet, there it is. Silent. But its silence isn't ignorance. It's knowing. The kind of knowing that whispers, "You weren't the first." And just when you start to adjust to this, just when you start to accept that civilization may have dawned much earlier than anyone dared to admit, you discover it wasn't alone. Because 23 miles away, in the same desolate, dusty terrain, something even stranger rises from the ground. A brother, a rival, a deeper chapter. And the hill is whispering again. Chapter 8. Karahan Tepe, the Chamber of Whispers. The earth keeps secrets. Some hide behind stone, others are stone. Just 23 miles southeast of Göbekli Tepe, the earth folds into another hill, another mound, another name that almost no one outside Turkey had heard of until recently. Karahan Tepe. If Göbekli Tepe was the whisper that awakened the world, Karahan Tepe is the follow-up blow that takes your breath away. Because while one ancient site overturning history is shocking, two is a pattern, a message, a map. Karahan Tepe doesn't just echo Göbekli Tepe, it answers it, it expands it, and in some ways it surpasses it. Because if Göbekli Tepe proved we were wrong about the beginnings of civilization, Karahan Tepe suggests we haven't even begun to understand how wrong we are. Karahan Tepe was first brought to public attention in the early 2000s, but actual excavations didn't begin until much later. And when they did, they peeled back the soil like a scab hiding something ancient, something still raw. The site is older than old. It's part of the so-called Taş Tepeler network, a constellation of pre-pottery Neolithic sites scattered across southeastern Turkey. They predate the wheel, the plow, even pottery itself. That's right. The people who built Karahan Tepe hadn't even figured out how to make a cup, but they could quarry, shape, and erect 10-ton limestone monoliths with anatomical precision and philosophical intent. Explain that. What they unearthed here wasn't just another stone circle. It was different. Göbekli Tepe has T-shaped pillars, standing in open circles. Once did, they're part of a wider ceremonial field. But Karahan Tepe hides underground. It's secretive, subterranean, like something meant to be protected or hidden. The central feature, a chamber carved directly into bedrock, accessed by a narrow entrance, shaft that feels more like a throat than a door. Inside, 11 massive erect pillars surround the walls, watching, waiting. In the center of the chamber, a figure, a single stone head emerging from the bedrock, looking down with a solemn, otherworldly expression. It's unsettling. You don't walk into this chamber, you descend. The air changes, cools, and you feel not like a visitor, but like an intruder. This isn't a tourist site. It's a womb, a tomb, a theater of forgotten gods. And that's just one room. Around the site, there are more monoliths, more symbols, more strange and suggestive carvings. Animals again, snakes, wildcats, birds, but also humans. Faces, bodies, the beginnings of iconography, the birth of narrative. Some stones are carved with rows of phalluses leading many to dub it the Temple of Ancestors or the Fertility Temple. But those are guesses, placeholders for something we can't decode. Because this wasn't just crude prehistoric porn. It's too organized, too specific. The repetition has rhythm, and rhythm is the first step toward meaning. Let's talk about that central figure, the one carved into the floor. It's not large, not grandiose, but it feels powerful. The head is elongated, the features abstract, the eyes almond-shaped, watching. There's no clear context, no other statues like it, no writing to explain it. Just this solemn, isolated presence, like a stone priest frozen mid-sermon or a sentinel left behind when the rest of the world forgot. And the chamber it sits in isn't just symbolic, it's acoustically designed. Whispers bounce, footsteps echo. It's built for sound, for ritual, for resonance. And when you realize that, another possibility begins to slip into view. Maybe Karahan Tepe wasn't just sacred, maybe it was sonic. Think about it. Underground chambers, echo chambers, perfectly smooth walls, symbolic pillars, a figure placed precisely where echoes converge. This wasn't built just for eyes, it was built for ears, for vibration, for altered states. What if Karahan Tepe was an early cathedral? Not in the religious sense, but neurological. A place where sound-shaped minds, where chants and echoes induced trance, where rituals weren't about belief, but about experience. There's more. Karahan Tepe, like Göbekli Tepe, was buried on purpose, backfilled, erased. And again, we're left wondering why. Was it shame, reverence, preservation? Did the builders know something was coming? Or were they the last generation, the ones who knew history was ending and decided to seal the book? Because once again, the construction here isn't amateur hour. It shows sophistication, planning, stone mastery that rivals civilizations thousands of years younger. And all without agriculture, without metallurgy, without any of the supposed essentials of civilization. Which leads to an uncomfortable possibility. Maybe we've misunderstood what civilization is. We've always linked civilization to material progress, to tools, cities, writing. But what if the first civilizations weren't about control, but about connection? Not agriculture, but feeling. Not engineering, but energy. What if sites like Karahan Tepe weren't anomalies but templates? Places where early humans gathered to commune not necessarily with gods, but with each other, with nature, with the sky, with the past, with the future. And what if that kind of civilization, intangible, experiential, symbolic, was destroyed not by ignorance, but by catastrophe. Because here's the thing. Karahan Tepe and its sister sites weren't destroyed by conquest. There's no evidence of war, no fire, no toppled statues. They were buried intact. That smells of intentionality, of someone deciding, we're done. Seal it. Walk away. It's the same feeling you get from the Serapeum, from Machu Picchu, from Pumapunku. It's the whisper that says something ended here. And when you stack it all together, a pattern emerges. Around the end of the Younger Dryas, approximately 11,700 years ago, something massive happened. A shift, a trauma. Glaciers melted, sea levels rose, something big, fast, and deadly swept the planet. And yet, what survived was stone. Stone that remembers. Karahan Tepe isn't just an archaeological site, it's a scar that never healed. And just when you think it's safe to rest, to digest the implications of ancient minds, creating monuments of sound and shadow, another ripple hits. Because Karahan Tepe isn't alone, it's part of a web, a constellation. And one of its stars lies far from the desert, beneath the waves in the Pacific, where a mountain of rock, steps, and angles lies drowned under salt and secrecy. The Yonaguni Monument waits, and it may be the oldest of all. Chapter 9. Yonaguni, the Pacific Atlantis. Beneath the water, off the southern coast of Japan, under the churning flutter of the East China Sea, lies a ruin that shouldn't be there. Divers discovered it by accident in the 1980s, just another day scanning the seafloor near Yonaguni Island, until the ocean pulled back the curtain, and what it revealed wasn't coral, wasn't a shipwreck, wasn't the usual chaos of the sea. It was geometry. Massive, right-angled, flat terraces, steep walls, steps, corridors. A design as if the sea had drowned a city but left the blueprint. This is the Yonaguni Monument. For some, it's the smoking gun of a lost global civilization. For others, a curious oddity of geology. But for anyone who's seen it with their own eyes, one thing is certain. It doesn't feel natural. The formation extends more than 300 feet long and rises some 90 feet from the ocean floor. From above, it looks like a ziggurat or stepped pyramid. Platforms with sharply defined edges that intersect at nearly perfect right angles. There are flat surfaces so clean they appear machine-cut, steps so uniformly spaced they defy randomness, vertical drops that cut like architectural blueprints into the bedrock. And yet, mainstream geology insists it's all natural. Just ocean currents, tectonic shifts, erosion, pressure, and time. But let's get into that. Because if you're going to claim nature made this, nature better had a good architect on staff. Let's start with the steps. They're uniform, repeating, precision cut into stone. In some sections, they rise to consistent heights and depths, like a staircase meant for giants. Not one or two steps, but dozens, some extending for meters. That kind of symmetry doesn't usually happen underwater, where erosion is a chaotic, directionless force. Nature doesn't care about tread depth. Then there are the corners. At Yonaguni, corners don't erode, they persist. Right angles, 90-degree joints that form walls, platforms, and corridors. On land, we'd call them foundations. Underwater, we're told they're coincidences, except there are so many of them, and they're connected. They form structures, not scattered rocks. Structures. One feature, called the main terrace, resembles a complete ceremonial platform with what appears to be an altar. Nearby is a channel that snakes around like a moat, and further still, a rectangular trench with standing stones. Some say pillars, rising from its depths. And then there's the so-called turtle, a rock formation shaped like a giant reptile perched perfectly on one of the levels. Too much symbolism, maybe, but coincidences start to sweat when you line up this many. Now let's talk about the most unsettling possibility: age. Yonaguni is submerged at a depth that suggests it sank around the end of the last ice age, approximately 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. That's the same time frame as Göbekli Tepe, the same window as the Younger Dryas Cataclysm, the same mysterious historical pause when ice melted, oceans rose, and human memory rebooted. If Yonaguni was above sea level before that, and there's geological evidence it was, then we're looking at construction, or at least modification, that predates all known civilizations. It's not just older than the Great Pyramid. It's older than agriculture. Let that sink in. A megalithic structure on the seafloor with architectural features that mirror those found in ancient temples across the world. Aligned steps, stone pillars, interlocking blocks. And it's thousands of years older than Sumer, than Egypt, than the wheel. Skeptics argue there are no tools, no artifacts, no bones. True, but the ocean isn't kind to preservation. Salt water doesn't cradle history, it devours it. Wood dissolves, metal corrodes, DNA fades. All that remains is stone. And that's the pattern. Because stone is stubborn. It doesn't care what we believe, it just sits, waits, survives. Proponents of the natural formation theory point to similar geological formations elsewhere. Basalt columns, sandstone shelves, tectonic strata. But none of them show the design that Yonaguni does. The alignment, the order. This isn't a cave system, it isn't a reef, it isn't a pile of rocks. It's a design. Even trained architects and engineers who have examined the site admit it looks deliberate. It looks like architecture. But maybe the most chilling feature of all isn't the structure itself. It's what surrounds it. Because Yonaguni doesn't sit isolated. The entire region around the Ryukyu Islands is littered with submerged anomalies. Rock walls, terrace-like formations, underwater ridges that look suspiciously man-made. It's as if the sea had consumed not one monument, but a city, or a coastline of cities, a network. And that brings us to cultural memory. Japan has myths of sunken kingdoms like Mu or Lemuria. So does Polynesia, India, even parts of South America. Stories of great floods, of lands that vanished, of gods who walked among men and then withdrew to the deep. We've always dismissed these as fantasy. But Yonaguni sits like an accusation in the swell. It's not here to prove anything. It simply is. Silent, wet, inconvenient. It doesn't care about academic pride or geological comfort zones. It only knows one thing. It exists. And it's not alone. Because stone remembers, and in the black, cold silence of the seafloor, something waits. A whisper from before the flood, from before history hardened into textbooks, from before we decided what was possible. And if the sea can hide a city, what else is hiding? Somewhere colder, wilder, far to the north among the Siberian cliffs, where legends speak of giants and ancient walls built by hands too large to name. Gornaya Shoria waits, and the stones there don't just defy belief, they mock it. Chapter 10. Gornaya Shoria, the megaliths of giants. Hidden in the snowy wilderness of southern Siberia, where mountains rise like sleeping gods and winter never really leaves, lies a structure that breaks every rule we thought we understood about stone, scale, and sanity. Gornaya Shoria, or as some have called it, the Wall of Giants. You've probably never heard of it. There are no tour buses, no documentaries narrated by educated British voices, no signs or fences. Just a remote, wild stretch of the taiga and granite where the cold bites and the silence listens. A place where even Russian researchers tread carefully, and where the stones themselves seem to stare back. At first glance, it looks like a landslide. Massive rocks piled on a steep slope, but then the pattern emerges. The geometry asserts itself. These aren't loose stones, they're blocks. Stacked, aligned, angled, fitted. Some rise vertically like towers, others extend horizontally, forming levels like courses of an ancient wall. But these aren't your average megaliths. They're beyond megalithic. They're stupidly, comically impossible. Some stones, it's estimated, weigh more than 3,000 tons. They dwarf even the great blocks of Baalbek. And that's not a typo. 3,000 tons. For reference, that's about the weight of 500 elephants or 7 fully loaded Boeing 747s. It is, in short, stupidly, comically impossible. Yet, there they are. Giant slabs of stone cut with straight edges and right angles, interlocked as if they'd been molded by the hand of some primordial architect with a taste for scale. The size of these blocks breaks the mind. You don't try to imagine how they were moved, you try to imagine why anyone would attempt it. There's no crane on Earth that could move one. There's no ancient ramp system that could account for the logistics of placing them on a hillside hundreds of meters above the valley floor. And the cuts? They're not natural fractures, they're too precise, too smooth. In some cases, the seams between stones are so tight, they echo the impossible joints of Sacsayhuaman or Pumapunku. You see beveling, you see alignment, you see intention. The orthodox explanation: geological formations, natural processes, freezing, thawing, tectonic uplift. But that explanation phrases quickly when you're confronted with the design, the repetition, the improbable symmetry. This isn't chaos, it's choreography. And it gets worse, because some of the blocks appear to have fallen. Not rolled, fallen. As if something hit the wall hard, as if upper levels gave way under pressure. You see stones shattered on impact, split in half, their clean inner faces exposed to the elements for the first time in millennia. You see what looks like structural collapse, not weathering, failure, which implies the impossible, that this structure once stood whole, complete, and functioning, that it was built, not born. And that means someone built it. Someone who could quarry, shape, and place multi-thousand-ton stones in formation. Someone who did this at a time when Siberia was considered a prehistoric wasteland populated by nomadic tribes with stone tools and campfire myths. No written records, no architectural tradition, no metal, no wheels, no science. Just granite and frost. So, who? That question looms like breath in cold air, and it brings with it all the uncomfortable possibilities. Was there an earlier age of humanity? A lost civilization that reached technological heights not in the heat of the Fertile Crescent, but in the frozen, unforgiving vastness of Siberia? What kind of culture builds on this scale? For what? A fortress, a city, a temple, or something stranger? Or something not meant to house humans, but to channel energy, store knowledge, serve as a gateway? There's a chilling hypothesis that the megaliths of Gornaya weren't meant for us, that they belong to a race of beings, human or otherwise, who weren't just taller, but larger. The stones aren't just massive in weight, they're massive in proportion. You could walk under some of the horizontal slabs without ducking. The scale feels wrong, inhuman. And that's where myth begins to bubble up through the cracks. The locals speak of giants, not metaphorical giants, giants. Beings who lived before the floods, before the ice, before our species' amnesia settled in. They tell of a time when the earth was ruled by larger men, taller than trees, stronger than storms, creatures who could lift what we can't imagine moving. Who carved stone with a glance? Who built with mountains the way we stack bricks? It sounds like fantasy until you look at the wall and realize maybe it wasn't meant for us to find. Because Gornaya isn't easy to access. There are no paved roads. The nearest settlements are remote logging villages. Most people don't know it exists. The first real photos only surfaced in the 1990s, taken by Russian researcher Georgy Sidorov and a handful of mountaineers. Since then, interest has flickered, died, and been mostly ignored. Why? Because it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit the narrative, doesn't conform to the idea that humanity evolved in an orderly line from caves to cities, from sticks to smartphones. It's a rupture, a heresy, a fossilized accusation against the arrogance of our timeline. And what's worse, there's no explanation for why it's there. It's not near a known trade route. It's not part of any known culture. It simply exists, like a marker left in the wrong chapter. So what does it mean? Maybe it means history isn't a ladder, but a spiral. That civilizations rise and fall like tides, that what we call progress is just one flavor of memory. Or maybe it means something else came before us. Something that understood stone, not just how to cut it, but how to speak to it, how to record, how to encode, how to remember. Because that's the thread, isn't it? From Baalbek to Pumapunku, from Machu Picchu to the Serapeum, from Göbekli Tepe to Yonaguni. The language endures, resists, remembers. And Gornaya is a sentence in that language, a sentence carved in the grammar of giants. And even if we can't translate it, we can feel it. In our bones, in the cold, in the weight of unanswered questions. And just when you think you've seen the upper limit of impossible, just when your brain begs for something normal, you hit the Mediterranean. And on a sun-soaked island, known for its beaches and silent ruins, you find temples. But not the kind you expect. These are older, stranger, and they're not built. They're grown. Chapter 11. Megalithic Malta. The laboratory of the gods. On the rocky shores of Malta, sun-drenched and wave-battered, lie ruins so old they might be hallucinations. They're silent, understated, not massive like Giza or impossible like Baalbek, but they're older than both. They're some of the oldest megalithic temples ever built by human hands, especially since those hands, by all accounts, shouldn't have existed in such a state of mastery. Haga Kim, Manadra, Taxien, Gantija, and others. Some dated as far back as 3,600 BC, but many researchers argue they're much older, deeply older. Not just old in the linear archaeological sense, but ancient in the mythological sense. As in, before time organized itself. The megalithic temples of Malta aren't ruins in the usual sense. They aren't collapsed cityscapes or tumbled towers. They're sculpted spaces, designed megalithic enclosures that feel more cultivated than constructed. As if they'd been coaxed from the rock instead of placed on top of it. And these aren't piles of rubble. These are sophisticated, freestanding structures, each with multiple apses like petals of a flower branching from a central axis. Think stone labyrinths with carefully aligned corridors, chambered interiors, and altars built into the walls themselves. They're complex, symmetrical, symbolic. Let's talk about size. Some of the stones used in Hagar Chim and Mnadra weigh up to 20 tons. These aren't small rocks. These are mammoth limestone slabs. Some more than 20 feet long, raised, shaped, and grooved into position without cranes, pulleys, or any evidence of advanced tools. Now consider this. There are no forests in Malta. There never were. That means no wooden rollers, no tall trees to make ramps. And yet, someone moved these stones. Someone maneuvered them into place with a precision that would make modern stonemasons sweat. Then there's the craftsmanship. These stones aren't roughly carved. Many are perfectly curved, forming semicircular apses with an almost architectural arrogance. Some walls are decorated with spiral motifs carved directly into the stone. Others feature representations of flora, fauna, and complex symbolic patterns, none of which is random. They echo, they repeat. This isn't decoration, it's a language, but a language we no longer understand. Let's talk alignment. Manajra in particular is aligned to the solar calendar with disturbing precision. Its central doorway frames the rising sun on the spring and autumn equinoxes. On the solstices, light hits stone slabs in precise, pre-planned ways. It's not rough astronomy. It's not close enough. It's designed light play thousands of years before modern telescopes or ephemerides. This suggests not just an understanding of solar cycles, but an intimate relationship with the movement of the heavens. These builders weren't just farmers. They were cosmic architects. And yet, who were they? This is where things get hazy. Because the people who built these temples left nothing else. No written language, no recorded history, no clue as to what they called themselves or what they believed. All we have are their bones, a few clay figurines, and their temples. And their temples are strange. Some of the spaces are too small to be communal. There's not enough room for large gatherings, but too precise, too ritualistically arranged to be personal. There are narrow passages leading to secluded chambers, low doorways, massive stones that seem placed not for structural function, but for symbolic meaning. At Hagar Kim, one of the stones has a hole drilled through it, perfectly circular, the size of a fist. On the solstices, light passes through that hole and lands on a specific altar. Exactly. Every year, without fail. Why? Because these people weren't building shelters. They were building calendars, portals, instruments. Now look at the ground around them. There are cart ruts, deep parallel grooves carved into Malta's limestone bedrock. These grooves cross the landscape in impossible directions, often leading directly into the sea. Some intersect, some diverge, some loop around. They're not worn by modern vehicles, they're prehistoric. But how prehistoric? Some geologists claim they're more than 10,000 years old based on rock weathering. Others claim they're much newer. But here's the kicker. Nobody knows what made them. The width between grooves is often too narrow for conventional carts. There are no wheel remains, no axles, no tracks. Just the grooves, running like veins through the landscape, diving under the waves, disappearing into cliffs. If you believe the more radical theorists, these tracks are the remains of antediluvian technology. Machines, vehicles, even tools used by a pre-flood civilization that has since become myth. If you believe the mainstream, they're erosion, repeated foot traffic, dragged sleds, a mystery we don't need to solve. But that's not good enough. Because Malta, small as it is, punches way above its archaeological weight class. This tiny island is home to structures that defy both time and logic. The temples themselves were buried under meters of soil and rubble when first discovered. And they weren't collapsed. They were backfilled. Deliberately. You know what that means? Just like Göbekli Tepe, just like Karahan Tepe, these temples were buried on purpose. Who does that? Who builds something monumental, sacred, astronomical, then hides it from the world? Only two kinds of people. Those who know the end is coming, or those who have already seen it. And then there's the silence. There's no record of these people migrating, no evidence of war, no signs of disease. They didn't vanish in the traditional archaeological sense. They simply stopped building. The culture that created Malta's temples simply ended. Abruptly, cleanly, like a play with the final act torn out. Maybe they died, maybe they left, or maybe, just maybe, their civilization wasn't meant to last. Maybe the temples weren't for the living, maybe they were memory, warning, instruction, and they left the message in the only language they knew would survive: stone. And what a message it is. That civilization isn't linear. that history isn't a straight line, that the ancestors we imagine as barefoot farmers may have had star maps, tools we can't name, and knowledge we've barely begun to rediscover. Malta's temples aren't anomalies. They're part of a pattern of remembrance, interruption, and erasure. And when you follow that pattern across Europe, across ancient Gaul, you start to find stones again. Not walls, not temples, lines. Thousands of them, aligned, standing, silent. Welcome to Karnak. Chapter 12. Karnak, the Army of Stone. The wind blows from the Atlantic, rough and salty, brushing across a sleepy corner of Brittany, France. The land rolls, pastoral hills, wildflower fields, drowsy villages that seem unchanged since the Middle Ages. But walk a little outside town, and you'll find something that doesn't belong. Something that looks as if the gods had spilled their dominoes. Stones. Thousands of them. Stretching across more than 4 kilometers, standing upright in rows. Not scattered, not random. Aligned. This is Karnak. And it's not just one of the largest prehistoric sites in the world, it's one of the most puzzling. We're talking about more than 3,000 individual megaliths. Some more than 20 feet tall. Some no taller than your waist, extending across the French countryside like the fossilized ribs of a forgotten machine. There are alignments, circles, dolmens, tumuli, menhirs. All the ancient vocabulary you've seen in textbooks, but none of the context. Because Karnak isn't a monument, it's a message. One we haven't deciphered. Let's talk numbers. The stones were placed between approximately 4,500 and 3,300 BC, according to carbon dating of nearby materials. That makes them older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge. Not as old as Göbekli Tepe, but Göbekli Tepe was buried for a reason. Karnak was left in the open, as if it wanted to be seen, as if it needed to be seen. And it has been seen. By archaeologists, by mystics, by military engineers, Freemasons, farmers, and lately by drone pilots who have begun to realize that Karnak stones aren't just arranged in lines, they're arranged in patterns. Mathematical, geometric, celestial. Start with the alignments. The stones aren't just in rows, they're in perfect rows. Parallel, equidistant, extending across terrain with a stubbornness that refuses to be chaotic. In some areas, the stones gradually increase in size, starting with small markers at one end and rising like a crescendo toward massive, imposing slabs. It's a rhythm, a progression, almost musical. Then, there's the orientation. Many rows are aligned on a northeast-southwest axis. Some align with sunrise and sunset on solstices. Others point toward constellations, lunar cycles, the Pleiades. There's debate, of course, because everything ancient and astronomical is drowned in debate. But the numbers line up too often to be coincidence. And here's the kicker. Some researchers believe Karnak was a megalithic observatory, not just for one celestial body, but for many. A calculator in stone, a calendar, a system for tracking solstices, equinoxes, eclipses, and planetary conjunctions. And if that's true, then the people who built it weren't primitive farmers. They were astronomers, engineers, geomancers. But wait, how do you move a 10-ton granite slab without wheels, without cranes, without steel? Some of the stones were quarried kilometers away, dragged across uneven terrain, set upright, balanced, aligned, multiplied thousands of times. For what? For gods, for rituals, for the stars? It doesn't add up. Because building a single dolmen or stone circle can be chalked up to culture, religion. But building thousands of stones in organized grids requires something more. It requires infrastructure. And there's no trace of it. No city, no temples, no permanent dwellings. Just fields and stone. As if the builders had come, built, and vanished, like megalithic monks leaving sacred geometry for the ground to remember. Let's talk about the types. Karnak isn't just rows, it includes menhirs, the standing stones, some more than 20 feet tall, planted like teeth in the earth. Dolmens, horizontal capstones balanced on verticals like stone tables, often used as tombs. Maybe, but some show no human remains. Tumuli, burial mounds, long barrows, chambers covered with earth, sometimes built around dolmens, sometimes empty. Stone circles, enclosures, gathering points, altars, stargates, pick your term. It's a buffet of sacred architecture without a coherent script, and the familiar style. Echoes of other sites, similarities to Stonehenge, to Ireland's megalithic passage tombs, to standing stones in Portugal, even to Korea's dolmens. It's almost as if there had been a shared language, a blueprint, a megalithic tradition that spanned continents and centuries. One that whispered, "This is how you anchor memory to earth." But it doesn't stop at style. Some theorists have proposed that the entire Karnak site resonates with geomagnetic currents, that the placement of stones enhances subtle earth energies, that the builders were mapping ley lines, that Karnak isn't a monument at all, it's a machine. A giant earth-based circuit designed not to worship the stars, but to interact with them. That idea sounds wild until you remember the precision of the alignments, until you factor in the acoustics of the dolmens, the resonant frequencies of stone types, the consistent relationship to cardinal points. Maybe it was a machine, one we no longer know how to turn on. And the people who built it, we don't know. There's no one. There are theories. Pre-Celtic tribes, sea peoples, even survivors of Atlantis. Each hypothesis is either too vague or too bold. What we know for sure is this: the builders left no writing, left no mythology, left no oral traditions, left no names. Just the stones, standing, waiting. And here's where things become, because Karnak feels different from the other sites. Less vertical, less monumental, but more expansive. As if it wasn't meant to impress from a single viewpoint, but to unfold as you move through it. It's kinetic architecture, a story that only reveals itself step by step. And maybe that's the point, because Karnak is about rhythm, repetition, pattern. It teaches by walking, by counting, by being there. It's not a statue, it's a ritual in motion. And if you walk long enough, you start to feel it. The tempo, the pulse, like a forgotten metronome marking a message in granite. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Over and over, until your feet and the earth start speaking the same language. It's not myth, it's memory. And Karnak remembers something we've forgotten. Something big, something precise, something deliberate. And just when you think you finally touch the mystery, it slips away. Because the rows end, the stones stop, the fields open, and the sky starts to feel heavy again. But the pattern doesn't fade. It moves across the channel, to an island, to a circle, to the most iconic stone structure in the world. Chapter 13. Stonehenge, the cosmic clock. On the windy plains of Salisbury, where sheep graze as if history were nothing more than grass, stands a stoic, grey monument, surrounded by myths older than memory. Everyone knows it. Every textbook shows it. Every tourist takes a photo and leaves with a shrug and a fridge magnet. But Stonehenge isn't just an old circle of rocks. It's the echo of something much, much older. A riddle chiseled in time, a surgical incision into the bedrock of human origin. And it begins, not with the stones you see, but with those that came before. Because Stonehenge isn't one monument, it's many. Layered, evolving, like a civilization trying to remember what it once knew. The current stone circle, The famous trilithons, the iconic uprights with their lintels locked like jaws, were erected around 2500 BC. But the site itself goes back another 500 to 1000 years, maybe more. Long before the stones, there were post holes, ditches, wooden markers, earthworks. A blueprint scratched into the ground long before it was carved in stone. And what a blueprint! Stonehenge isn't a messy circle. It's not a random arrangement. Its geometry is large scale. The circle is nearly perfect. The stones are shaped, not just placed. The spacing between them is deliberate. The Sarsens, those enormous sandstone blocks, were dragged from Marlborough Downs, 25 kilometers away. But the blue stones came from Wales, more than 150 miles away. Let's repeat that. 150 miles. Across rivers, hills, and valleys. Without wheels, without cranes, without paved roads. Just raw stone, some weighing up to 4 tons, dragged, floated, or rolled across prehistoric Britain. For what? To form a circle? To impress the neighbors? Number. To align with the sky. Because Stonehenge isn't just a circle, it's a clock. A calendar. A telescope made of granite and earth. On the summer solstice, the rising sun aligns perfectly with the heel stone, a neglected outlier that marks the boundary between Earth and cosmos. Stand in the center of the circle that morning, and you'll see the sun rise through the precise corridor formed by the tallest stones. That's not guesswork, that's engineering. The builders weren't just stacking rocks, they were measuring time. And not just solar time. Lunar cycles are encoded here too. The positions of certain stones track the moon's 18.6-year cycle. That's the kind of data you only get through long-term observation. Generations of skywatchers recording, predicting, building. But here's the twist. We don't know who they were. The culture that built Stonehenge left no writing, left no names, left no clear myths. All we have are bones, tools, and the stones themselves. And the stones are saying things we're not yet smart enough to decode. Let's talk about the architecture. The trilithons, the iconic pairs of uprights and lintels, aren't just balanced. They're joined. The lintels aren't balanced. They're connected using mortise and tenon joints like oversized Lego. The curvature of the circle is so precise that each lintel is uniquely carved to maintain the arc. This isn't amateur hour. This is stonework at a level we can barely imitate with modern tools. And yet, we're told this was built by Neolithic people with antler picks, wooden sleds, and lots of free time. Sure, and maybe the Mona Lisa was painted with finger paints by a blind man during a blackout. Because the deeper you go into the planning, the harder it becomes to believe this was a first attempt. Stonehenge isn't the work of a civilization learning, it's the work of a civilization remembering. There are more layers. Beyond the circle lie the cursus, a massive linear earthwork more than a mile long, and the avenue, a ceremonial roadway aligned with the solstice sunrise. Then there are the barrows, burial mounds that dot the surrounding countryside. Some contain elite individuals with grave goods from across Europe. This wasn't just a monument. It was a necropolis, a ritual hub, a node in a network. And it might not have stood alone. Archaeologists have found other stone circles across Britain, Ireland, Scotland, Wales. Many of them with similar solar and lunar alignments, similar construction techniques, some even older. Like the Ring of Brodgar, like Avebury. It's almost as if the entire island was once a map, a star chart, a memory palace made of stone. A civilization expressing itself not through empire, but through architecture as language. But what were they saying? That's the part we lost. Some say the circles were built for the dead. Others say they were places of healing. Some whisper of acoustic properties. Stand in the middle. sound behaves strangely. Resonance, vibrations, frequencies we don't fully understand. There's evidence of gatherings, massive feasts, animal bones from every corner of the island. Pottery, tools. People came here from far away, not just to build, but to celebrate, to mourn, to mark time. And maybe more. Maybe the site was a transmitter, a receiver, a signal tower. Not for messages, but for meaning. Because here's the thing. Nobody builds something this big for nothing. You don't drag stones across entire countries to make a pretty circle. You do it because something demands it. A vision, a voice, a memory. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't their vision. Maybe the builders of Stonehenge were inheritors, like the Incas with Sacsayhuaman, like the Romans at Baalbek, like the Tiwanaku at Pumapunku. Maybe they found the site, felt the energy, saw the alignments, and built on top of the bones of something older. Because beneath the current stones are older ones. Wooden posts, circular circles, sacred geometry burned into soil. This place has been special for millennia. The circles didn't start the history, they continued it. And then, without warning, they stopped. The culture that created Stonehenge simply stopped building. The knowledge faded, the techniques were lost, the names were erased. All that remains are the stones. Motionless, silent, but their silence isn't ignorance. It's knowing. The kind of knowing that whispers, "You weren't the first." And while you stand in the shadow of this forgotten marvel, in a place where myth and mortar collide, where the ancients defied time itself, a question begins to form in the deepest part of your mind. If this is real, if this existed before everything we think we know about civilization, what else is hiding out there? Because the pattern doesn't stop in Britain. It extends across oceans, across continents, to places where stories were told not in stone, but in water, in drowned cities, in memories that sink deeper than any abyss. Atlantis is calling. And history doesn't begin in a book. It begins with a philosopher and a warning. Chapter 14, Atlantis, the Lost Template. It begins with Plato. Not with stone, not with ruins, not with some sunken city pulled from the sea like a waterlogged conspiracy. Atlantis, the mother of all lost worlds, begins in a library in Athens, in the mind of a man who, by all accounts, had no intention of creating a myth. Plato, the philosopher, the thinker, the guy who gave us the Republic, the allegory of the cave, the forms. He also gave us Atlantis, not as a bedtime story, but as a footnote in his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, as a warning. According to Plato, Atlantis wasn't a fairy tale. It was history. A story given to him through a chain of transmission. Solon, the Athenian lawgiver, traveled to Egypt 150 years earlier. There he met priests who told him the story of a great civilization that had existed 9,000 years before that moment. A powerful empire that extended beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. A land blessed with resources, technology, knowledge, and arrogance. Atlantis, a continent, a naval power, a utopian machine turned hubris. And then cataclysm. Fire, earthquakes, floods, a single day and night of misfortune, swallowed by the sea. Gone. So what are we looking at here? A parable or a memory? Plato wasn't a fantasy novelist. He wasn't into fiction for fiction's sake. His writings were loaded with allegory, yes, but the tone of his Atlantis account is pointed, specific, geographic. He names locations, details, architecture. He describes agricultural systems, engineering, marvels, even the dimensions of canals and harbors. This wasn't vague mysticism, it was reportage. He talks about concentric rings of alternating land and water, a central island surrounded by circular moats connected by bridges. a great capital with temples and palaces, and a god at its center. Poseidon, a temple to him bathed in precious metals, gleaming with orichalcum, a lost alloy no one has ever reproduced. The Atlanteans weren't primitive. They had irrigation, they had advanced metallurgy, they had ships, armies, vast trade networks. And they had ambition. According to the account, Atlantis tried to conquer the known world. Athens, prehistoric and legendary Athens, stood alone in defiance and won. And then, without warning, Atlantis was erased. Plato's point. Civilizations rise, civilizations fall, even the greatest ones. Now here's the part that breaks the spine of history. Plato dates the fall of Atlantis to 9,000 years before Solon's time. That puts it around 11,600 years ago, at the end of the Younger Dryas. That same window where ice melted, sea levels rose, and global climate went insane. The same moment Göbekli Tepe was being built. The same moment flood myth ripples through every ancient culture on Earth. Coincidence? That's a lot of coincidence. Let's go broader. Ancient texts across the planet echo this pattern. In India, the Mahabharata speaks of flying machines, energy weapons, cities turned to ash in seconds. In Mesoamerica, the Popol Vuh speaks of multiple creations and destructions of man. The Sumerians wrote of the Great Flood. The Egyptians made references to the Zep Tepi, the first time when gods ruled the earth. And here's Plato, calmly reporting that Atlantis was real, and its destruction wasn't a metaphor. It was precedent. Critics arrive, of course. They say Plato made it up, that it's allegory, that it's a moral tale dressed in geography. And maybe it is, but then, where did the details come from? Why the specifics? Why the 9,000-year timeline? Why tie it to real places, real measurements? Why go so hard? And more importantly, why does it fit? Because when you look at the pre-flood anomalies scattered across the globe, Baalbek, Pumapunku, the pyramids, the Serapeum, Göbekli Tepe, Atlantis stops being a joke. It starts feeling like context. A lost world, a high-tech civilization. Not flying cars and glass skyscrapers, but a society that understood astronomy, geometry, and geophysics at a level we still struggle to match. A society that encoded knowledge in stone, that left messages in alignments, proportions, frequencies. A civilization that foresaw its own end. And here's the darkest possibility. What if Atlantis didn't fall by accident? What if it triggered its own destruction? There are whispers, myths scattered like breadcrumbs, that hint at forbidden knowledge. Forces manipulated beyond control, lost energy sources, portals, grid systems. Theories that sound like science fiction until you're standing in front of 1,000-ton stones balanced with microchip precision. What if Atlantis wasn't just the origin of myth, but the source code of ancient memory? And what if the flood wasn't punishment but protocol? A hard reset. Clear the board. Let the survivors scatter. Let the stories degrade into religion, then legend, then bedtime stories. Let the temples sink. Let the towers collapse. Let the knowledge hide in stone, in myth, in metaphor. Because here's the thing. Stone doesn't lie. It doesn't exaggerate. It doesn't forget. It just waits. And when the waters recede, when the ice melts, when the species that forgot itself looks back in wonder at the ruins dotting the earth, Atlantis will still be there. Not as a name, but as a question. A pressure in the bones, a knowing behind the eyes that we weren't the first, that we won't be the last. And that somewhere beneath the waves, beneath the myths, beneath the bones of time itself, the answer keeps singing, waiting. And the next verse, it's coming from the east, where another myth, another lost continent, waits in silence. Mu, Lemuria, Call it what you want. The echoes are the same. But before we get there, there's one more stop. A face in the sand, a guardian of the plateau. A witness that's been staring east toward eternity, with watermarks on its sides that whisper of rain that hasn't fallen in 10,000 years. The Sphinx. And it may have all the answers. Chapter 15. The Sphinx, the last witness. It stares silently, monolithic, impassive. The Great Sphinx of Giza isn't just old, it's beyond old. It doesn't try to explain itself anymore. It just sits there, half lion, half man, complete mystery. Carved from the bedrock of the Giza Plateau itself, it doesn't stand on the earth. It is the earth, molded into something impossible. We're told the Sphinx was built around 2500 BC, that it was commissioned by Pharaoh Khafre, that it's just another tomb marker in a necropolis of royal egos. But that story doesn't stick. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't explain the weathering, the erosion, the riddle etched into every grain of its battered sandstone face. Because here's the thing, the Sphinx looks older than Egypt, older than the pyramids, older than civilization. It's not just ancient, it's anomalous. Let's start with the most obvious evidence, the erosion. When geologist Dr. Robert Schoch examined the Sphinx in the early 1990s, he wasn't looking to make headlines. He was just studying rock. But what he saw left him cold. The body of the Sphinx isn't eroded by wind and sand, the kind of weathering you'd expect in a desert climate. It's eroded by water. Vertical undulations, rounded contours, rain erosion. But Egypt hasn't had significant, sustained rainfall in more than 9,000 years. That pushes the Sphinx's construction back to at least 7,000 BC, maybe even 10,000 BC. And suddenly, we're not talking about dynastic Egypt anymore. We're in the shadow of the Ice Age. We're pre-flood, pre-agriculture, prehistoric. And there's something else strange. The head. The Sphinx's head is disproportionately small compared to the body. It looks wrong, like it doesn't belong, like it was recarved. And that's exactly what many researchers believe, that the original Sphinx may have had the head of a lion or some other totemic beast, and then later recarved in the likeness of a pharaoh when dynastic Egyptians inherited the site. They didn't build the Sphinx, they found it. And that makes them not the architects, but the caretakers. So who built the original? And why? Because the Sphinx isn't just a sculpture. It's aligned, dead on, with true east. It stares directly at the rising sun on the spring equinox. And on the vernal equinox, around 10,500 BC, when the constellation Leo rose with the sun, the Sphinx would have looked directly at its celestial counterpart. Leo, the lion, the age of the lion. Coincidence or signature? Because ancient architecture doesn't do coincidence. It does alignment, intention, symbolism so thick it makes your teeth ache. Every angle matters, every shadow tells a story. And the Sphinx story isn't a tomb marker. It's a clock, a message in stone, a snapshot of the sky at a moment when the earth was different, when seas were lower, when ice still gripped the poles, when whatever civilization carved this beast from bedrock knew the stars not as poetry, but as data, as destiny. And we haven't even touched the underground, because beneath the Sphinx lies another mystery, or maybe more. There have been rumors for decades, backed by ground-penetrating radar and seismic scans, that cavities exist beneath the Sphinx. Chambers, passages, possibly rooms. And some believe these aren't just empty spaces, they're a library, a hall of records. Plato wrote of such things, so did the ancient Egyptians. A hidden vault containing the knowledge of a long-vanished civilization. Not scrolls, not books. Knowledge encoded in geometry, in vibration, in language forgotten before it was ever remembered. Egypt's own myths speak of the Zep Tepi, the first time, an era when gods walked among men, when civilization was gifted, not invented. The Sphinx is said to be from that time. Not the age of men, but the age of memory, of pre-memory. And the Sphinx is the key, a guardian, a threshold, a test. Because if you accept that it's older than Egypt, older than writing, older than every textbook ever written, then what does that say about us? What does that say about what we've lost? Because the Sphinx wasn't built to be seen. It was built to survive. To survive floods, sandstorms, time. To sit and wait until we were ready to ask the right questions. And we're barely starting to ask them. Why was it carved from a single piece of stone? Why does the body bear the same erosion found only in Nile cataracts? Why is the head the wrong size? Why are the proportions off? Because maybe they're not off. Maybe the proportions made sense before. Before the recarving, before the rain stopped, before history hit reboot. And then there are the chambers. If we ever open them, if we ever read the code etched into the grain of its bones, we might discover that we weren't the first, not the best, not the peak. Just the most recent reboot of a story told in flood, flame, and stone. Because truth doesn't just live in books, it lives in silence, in gaps, in shadows carved by ancient hands into rocks so old they forgot their name. The Sphinx doesn't explain itself. It challenges us to try. And if we ever open the chambers below, if we ever read the code, we might discover that the question wasn't who built these impossible monuments of stone. The question was why they left them for us. Because maybe they knew we'd forget. Maybe they knew the next species, the next iteration, the next civilization to rise from the ashes would need reminders. That it would need to know that time isn't linear, that history isn't progress, that we're part of a cycle that's bigger than our lives, older than our myths, deeper than our fears. And when the stars align again, when the oceans rise again, when the next reset comes, maybe we'll leave something too. Something that survives, something that remembers, something that whispers across eons. They were here. They knew. And you are not alone. The Sphinx doesn't answer questions. It preserves them. And in its silence, in its infinite patience, in its refusal to explain itself, we find the most terrifying answer of all. That we've been here before. And we'll be here again. And between these cycles, between these cosmic breaths of civilization and collapse, only stone remembers. Only stone endures. Only stone knows. And now, we know too. The secret isn't who built these impossible monuments. The secret is that we never left. We just forgot.